4 vulnerabilities. That is what the US Navy discovered about itself in 7 weeks at Hormuz. Not weaknesses in a war game, not gaps identified in a classified simulation run by defense contractors in a basement in Arlington. Real vulnerabilities, operational, confirmed. Demonstrated against a $10 billion regional power that the US Navy destroyed militarily in 2 weeks and has been unable to fully resolve strategically in 7. Vulnerability. 1. The Navy can fire 850 cruise missiles in 5 weeks and have no reliable way to reload them at sea. It burned through 10 years of production in 35 days. Vulnerability 2. The Navy can clear mines at 10 per day, and an adversary can reseed faster than that from a speedboat at night. 2,000 mines take 200 days to clear. 10,000 mines take 1,000 days. Vulnerability 3. Military victory does not reopen a shipping lane. An insurance company in London does, and the Navy has no seat at that table. Vulnerability 4. The window between political authorization and first American cruise missile striking an adversary's territory is approximately 96 hours. China now knows that number with operational precision. Every one of those vulnerabilities was unknown, or underweighted, before Hormuz. Every one of them is catastrophically more dangerous when applied to Taiwan than to the Strait of Hormuz. And every one of them is being addressed right now in the most significant rewrite of American naval doctrine since the Cold War ended. Subscribe to War Vision. 6 videos explained how Hormuz unfolded. This video explains what it changed, and whether the changes are enough before someone decides to test them at a larger scale. Type ready in the comments if you think the Navy is. Type ready if you're not sure. The debate in the comments is the point. Let us go through each vulnerability precisely, not as criticism of the Navy, as operational data points that the Navy itself is now acting on. Vulnerability 1, magazine depth and the production gap. We covered the TRAM system in our 3rd video, the at-sea missile reload mechanism that the Navy tested twice before Hormuz, but had not yet fielded. Here is the full scope of the problem it reveals. Operation Epic Fury consumed 850 Tomahawk Block 5 cruise missiles in 5 weeks. Raytheon's current production rate, 60 to 90 missiles per year at peacetime tempo. The Navy fired the equivalent of 10 years of production in 35 days. But the deeper problem is not the Tomahawk. It is what firing 850 Tomahawks did to the VLS cells that also carry SM-6 interceptors, ESSM quad packs, and the full air defense layer that protects the carrier strike group. A standard Arleigh-Burke destroyer carries 96 VLS cells. In high-intensity operations at Hormuz, those cells were being shared between Tomahawk offensive strikes and SM-6 defensive intercepts simultaneously. Ships that fired heavily in the strike campaign had reduced air defense capacity for the escort mission that followed. The Navy managed this by rotating ships, 1 destroyer on strike duty, 1 on escort duty, the 3rd in transit to reload. The presence gap this creates is not a tactical problem at Hormuz, where the threat environment allows gaps to be managed. It is an existential problem at Taiwan, where the threat environment does not. China's PLA rocket force can fire salvos of ballistic and cruise missiles at American carrier groups continuously. It does not need gaps measured in hours. It needs gaps measured in minutes. The VLS rotation model that worked at Hormuz, 1 ship on, 1 off, 1 in transit, fails against an adversary that can exploit a 90-minute reload window. TRAM, the transferable reload at sea mechanism, is the direct response to this vulnerability. It eliminates the 3-week round trip to a concrete pier. It replaces it with a 4-hour replenishment alongside a supply ship. It was tested successfully in July 2024 and July 2025. It is scheduled to field across the fleet by late 2026 to early 2027. Hormuz happened in February 2026. TRAM was 11 months from fielding. The Navy fought a magazine depth war without the magazine depth solution, and China was watching the rotation schedule. Vulnerability 2, the mine clearance asymmetry. We covered this in detail in our mine clearing helicopter video. Here's the strategic implication that video did not fully draw. The MH-53E Sea Dragon clears approximately 8 to 12 mines per day under operational conditions. That rate is not a failure of doctrine or technology. It is a physical constraint. The sweep sled moves at 25 knots, the corridor has finite width, weather creates no-fly windows, and each cleared lane must be resurveyed before it is declared safe for transit. Iran seeded approximately 2,000 mines, at 10 per day, 200 days. But Iran did not stop seeding mines when the shooting started. High RGC fast attack boats have been conducting night mine-laying operations throughout the clearance campaign. The net clearance rate, mines removed minus mines added, is classified. Open source estimates suggest the net rate is significantly lower than the gross clearance rate. Now apply that to Taiwan. China's mine inventory is estimated at between 80,000 and 100,000 naval mines of various types. Influence mines, bottom mines, moored contact mines, and rising mines that can be deployed from submarines at depth and activate on command. If China seeds 10,000 mines and the Taiwan Strait approaches before any military action begins, which it can do using fishing vessels, commercial ships, and submarines over a period of weeks without triggering military response, the clearance timeline at Hormuz rates is 1,000 days. Nearly 3 years. 3 years of Taiwan Strait closure would inflict economic damage so catastrophic that no economic model has fully priced it. The semiconductor supply chain disruption alone, 88% of the world's most advanced chips produced in a facility whose supply chain transits the strait, would cascade through every technology-dependent economy on Earth within 90 days. The Navy's response to the mine asymmetry is a direct allocation of the post-Hormuz defense supplemental budget, the first dedicated U.S. naval mine warfare investment increase since the Cold War, additional MH-53E operational tempo funding, acceleration of the MQ-8C Fire Scout mine hunting integration, and a classified program understood to be an autonomous mine-laying capability to threaten China's own port approaches as a deterrent. Deterrence through reciprocal mine threat. Iran taught the lesson. The Navy is applying it. Vulnerability 3, the non-military weapon problem. This is the hardest vulnerability to address because it is not in the Navy's lane. The insurance market mechanism that kept 250 tankers at anchor, despite the Navy's escort offer, is not a military problem. It cannot be solved by a better destroyer, a faster mine-clearing helicopter, or a more capable carrier air wing. It is a financial and legal architecture problem, and it sits entirely outside the Department of Defense's authority, budget, or expertise. The Navy's response to this vulnerability is the most unusual doctrinal adaptation in the post-Hormuz period. The Department of Transportation, the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, and the Department of State are now engaged in a working group specifically designed to pre-negotiate war risk insurance frameworks for Taiwan Strait transit before any conflict begins, so that the commercial shipping market does not collapse in the opening days of a Taiwan contingency the way it collapsed at Hormuz. The goal? A pre-negotiated government indemnification framework that activates automatically when a Taiwan Strait emergency is declared, guaranteeing war risk cover for commercial vessels transiting under U.S. Navy escort without requiring Lloyd's underwriters to price an actuarial model in real time under fire. Iran exposed that the commercial shipping market is a strategic center of gravity that military force cannot protect. The U.S. government is trying to build a financial architecture that closes that gap before China exploits it. Whether it works depends on whether governments in London, Tokyo, and Brussels will pre-commit to indemnification frameworks in peacetime for a conflict that has not started. That is a diplomatic problem, not a military one, and it is being worked right now because Hormuz proved the cost of not working it in advance. Vulnerability 4, the 96-hour window. This is the most operationally precise piece of intelligence China extracted from the Hormuz conflict, and the most dangerous. From the political authorization of Operation Epic Fury on February 27th, to the first Tomahawk striking Iranian territory on February 28th, approximately 96 hours of final preparation, targeting confirmation, and legal authorization. That 96-hour window is now a known quantity. China's military planners have updated every Taiwan contingency plan with a specific parameter they did not have before February 28th. The American strike machine requires approximately 4 days from political go to first precision weapon on target. In a Taiwan scenario, 96 hours is the planning window China needs to make military action irreversible before American precision strike begins degrading its capability. China's current amphibious assault doctrine for Taiwan, as understood through open-source PLA publications and Taiwan's own defense assessments, assumes an initial seizure operation that can establish a significant beachhead in 48 to 72 hours. The Hormuz timing data confirms that this window, 48 to 72 hours, falls inside the 96-hour American response threshold. China now knows that if it can complete the critical phase of a Taiwan operation within 72 hours of initiation, American precision strike capability will not have arrived at scale before the military situation on the ground has changed in ways that fundamentally alter the political calculus of intervention. The Navy's response to this vulnerability is the most strategically significant and the most classified. Publicly available information suggests it involves pre-positioning precision strike assets in the Pacific at a higher readiness posture than the pre-Hormuz baseline, reducing the political authorization cycle for certain categories of response, and accelerating the deployment of submarine-launched strike capability that does not require the 96-hour preparation window surface forces need. Submarines do not need 96 hours. They are already there. But that response has its own limits. Submarine strike capacity is finite, and China's anti-submarine warfare investment over the last decade has been specifically calibrated to compress the operational advantage American submarines currently hold in the Western Pacific. The 96-hour window is being worked. It is not closed. Now let us put the scale comparison on the table, because every Hormuz lesson we have discussed becomes categorically more dangerous when the geography changes from the Persian Gulf to the Taiwan Strait. The Hormuz corridor, 6 nautical miles wide. The Taiwan Strait navigable corridor, 110 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. That 18-fold increase in width does not mean Taiwan is 18 times harder to minesweep. It means the mine inventory required to create actuarial uncertainty across the full width scales proportionally, and China's mine inventory of 80,000 to 100,000 units already exceeds that threshold by an order of magnitude. The Hormuz economic damage, $40 billion per week, $280 billion over 7 weeks. The Taiwan Strait economic damage. The corridor carries the supply chains for 88% of the world's most advanced semiconductor production. A 60-day closure would disrupt automotive production globally. Approximately 15 million vehicles per month that require chips from Taiwan. It would suspend smartphone and consumer electronics production across every major brand. It would halt the procurement of the advanced chips that every AI data center expansion depends on. And it would create a defense production crisis. Every next-generation American weapon system uses Taiwanese origin components. Conservative estimates of a 60-day Taiwan Strait closure, $2 trillion in direct economic damage. That is not 7 times the Hormuz number. That is 71 times the Hormuz 7-week total. In 60 days. At Hormuz, the global economy absorbed $40 billion per week, and the political pressure for a negotiated settlement began building within 3 weeks. At Taiwan, the political pressure from $2 trillion in 60 days would be instantaneous and overwhelming. From allies, from markets, from every government whose semiconductor-dependent economy is collapsing in real time. This is the scale multiplier that makes every Hormuz vulnerability terrifying when applied to Taiwan. Iran created a $40 billion per week problem that generated measurable diplomatic pressure in 3 weeks. China can create a $2 trillion in 60 days problem that generates existential economic pressure in 3 days. The insurance market dynamic at Hormuz, Lloyd's suspended war risk cover for a corridor carrying oil. Expensive, manageable, survivable for most economies with strategic petroleum reserves. At Taiwan, the commodity being disrupted is not substitutable. There is no strategic semiconductor reserve. TSMC's 3 nanometer and 2 nanometer fabs cannot be replicated outside Taiwan in any time frame relevant to a 60-day crisis. The insurance suspension of Taiwan's Strait transit does not just close a shipping lane. It begins the physical decoupling of the global technology economy in ways that cannot be reversed in weeks or months. The mine clearance math. At Hormuz, 2,000 mines at 10 per day is 200 days. Manageable, painful, but finite. At Taiwan, China seeds 10,000 mines before the first shot is fired. At 10 per day, 1,000 days, 2.7 years, during which the semiconductor supply chain is disrupted, during which the insurance market is suspended, during which the political pressure for accommodation grows every week. China does not need to win a military engagement at Taiwan. China needs to sustain actuarial uncertainty in the Taiwan Strait for long enough that the political and economic pressure produces an accommodation. Iran proved that military defeat does not close that window. The window stays open as long as the mines are in the water. China has 80,000 mines. The Navy clears 10 per day. Let us do the final math. 80,000 divided by 10 equals 8,000 days, 21 years. That number is not a prediction. It is a deterrent calculation. China does not need to cede 80,000 mines to close the strait actuarially. It needs to cede enough that the clearance timeline exceeds the political patience of every economy that depends on Taiwanese chips. That number is somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 mines based on the Hormuz actuarial precedent. China has 80,000 in inventory. The deterrent math is not close, and China now knows exactly how to use it because Iran demonstrated the mechanism at 1/40th the scale. Here is what the U.S. Navy is actually changing. Not what it is studying, not what it is considering, what it is implementing right now in the 12 months since Hormuz began that will alter the force it brings to any Taiwan contingency. Change 1, TRAM acceleration. The transferable reload. At sea mechanism, the hydraulic rail system that eliminates the pendulum problem of at-sea VLS reloading, was scheduled to field by late 2026 to early 2027. Post-Hormuz supplemental budget requests have allocated additional funding to accelerate the production of TRAM kits and the modification of Lewis and Clark-class dry cargo ships to serve as dedicated VLS replenishment vessels. The goal? TRAM operational capability on at least 6 destroyers before the end of 2027, with a full fleet integration by 2029. This is not the Navy studying the problem. This is the Navy funding the solution. The Hormuz magazine depletion event created the political and budgetary justification that the TRAM program had been seeking for 3 years. 850 Tomahawks in 35 days made the argument that two successful at-sea tests never could. Change 2. Distributed maritime operations scaling. DMO is the doctrine that disperses the fleet from the carrier-centric formation that has defined American naval power since World War II. Instead of 2 or 3 carrier strike groups operating as concentrated forces, DMO distributes firepower across dozens of smaller, harder-to-target surface and subsurface platforms, operating across a wide geographic area simultaneously. Hormuz validated the vulnerability of concentrated forces to actuarial displacement. The carrier cannot enter the Persian Gulf. The carrier is 500 nautical miles from the strait. Its aircraft have 40 minutes on station. The same geography problem at Taiwan, where carrier standoff distance from DF-21D coverage pushes the strike group to ranges where its aircraft have comparable transit problems, makes the concentrated carrier group a strategic liability rather than an asset in the opening phase. Post-Hormuz, the Navy is accelerating the procurement of the Constellation-class frigate, a smaller, more numerous, less expensive surface combatant designed for distributed operations. It is increasing the autonomous vessel programs, Ghost Fleet Overlord unmanned surface vessels, that can operate inside contested waters, where the risk calculation prohibits manned warships. And it is restructuring its specific deployment rotations to maintain a permanently dispersed forward presence rather than surging concentrated forces when a crisis begins. Distributed presence is harder to displace actuarially than concentrated presence. China's mine doctrine, insurance market strategy, and 96-hour window calculation all assume a concentrated American force that must surge to the theater. A force that is already distributed and already present changes the assumptions underlying China's entire Taiwan timeline. Change 3. Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations at Taiwan Scale. We covered EABO in the USS Tripoli video. The Marine Corps doctrine of establishing temporary land-based firing positions on small islands to create a kill zone that ships cannot enter. At Hormuz, EABO was demonstrated at limited scale. The 31st MEU used forward positions in the strait to extend the Navy's effective coverage without putting surface ships inside the minefield. Taiwan's geography makes EABO potentially decisive in ways Hormuz could not. The first island chain, the arc of islands from Japan through the Ryukyus, Taiwan itself, the Philippines, and Indonesia, creates a natural geography for distributed marine positions that can threaten Chinese naval and air forces throughout the Strait and South China Sea approaches. Post-Hormuz, the Marine Corps is receiving its first major weapons acquisition increase in a decade. Additional HIMARS batteries, additional naval strike missiles for ground-launched anti-ship employment, and a classified number of additional Ospreys and CH-53K King Stallion helicopters for the rapid deployment that EABO requires. The doctrine was tested at Hormuz. The investment is being made for Taiwan. Change 4. Pre-negotiated financial architecture. The most unusual post-Hormuz change, and the one least visible in any defense budget document, is the Interagency Working Group on Taiwan's Strait Commercial Shipping Continuity. Treasury, State, Transportation, and the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative are working with allied finance ministries and regulators in the UK, Japan, South Korea, and Australia on a pre-negotiated framework for government war risk indemnification that would activate automatically in a Taiwan emergency. The goal? Eliminate the Lloyd's suspension event that created the tanker captain problem at Hormuz. If governments pre-commit to indemnifying commercial hulls before the conflict begins, the insurance market cannot suspend cover in the opening days of a crisis and create the actuarial closure that Iran weaponized. This is not a military solution. It is a financial architecture solution to a financial architecture vulnerability that Hormuz exposed. And it requires governments to make binding financial commitments in peacetime, committing to cover war risk on hundreds of billions of dollars in commercial hull value for a conflict that has not started and may never start. Whether that pre-commitment survives the political scrutiny it requires in 7 different legislative bodies is the open question. The working group is underway. The commitment is not yet made. Here is what all of these changes do not add up to. A closed vulnerability set. TRAM fields in 2027 at the earliest for initial operational capability. A full Taiwan contingency could occur before 2027. If it does, the magazine depletion problem that Hormuz exposed is still present in the force that responds. Distributed maritime operations is a doctrine. The procurement to make it a capability, the Constellation frigates, the Ghost Fleet vessels, the autonomous systems, is funded but not delivered. Doctrine without procurement is a concept. China is not deterred by concepts. EABO at Taiwan scale has never been exercised. The 31st MEU demonstrated it at limited scale at Hormuz. Executing it across the first island chain under Chinese anti-access fires, DF-21D ballistic missiles, land attack cruise missiles, hypersonic weapons, is a categorically different operational problem than deploying a marine platoon onto an uninhabited island in the Gulf of Oman. The pre-negotiated financial architecture requires 7 governments to make peacetime binding commitments. Governments are not fast. Legislatures are not fast. The working group has been underway for 4 months. No binding commitment has been announced. The honest position? The Navy is moving faster than it has moved doctrinally in 30 years. The Hormuz experience created a political and institutional urgency that no war game ever produced. The changes are real, funded, and in implementation. But implementation takes time. And the window between Iran's mines being cleared and China's decision about whether the Taiwan window is open is not a fixed quantity that accommodates American implementation timelines. China is watching the TRAM fielding schedule. China is watching the Constellation frigate delivery delays. China is watching the EABO exercise calendar. China is watching the pre-commitment working group make no announcements. The rewrite is underway. Whether it is complete before it is tested, that is the equation nobody outside classified planning rooms can solve. Now step back from the individual vulnerabilities, the Taiwan scale numbers, and the doctrinal responses, and look at what the Hormuz conflict actually produced for American strategic planning. For 20 years, the U.S. military has been running Taiwan war games, thousands of simulations, hundreds of classified exercises, red teams playing China, blue teams playing the United States. And those war games consistently produced a finding that was uncomfortable enough that it was managed at the classification level rather than addressed at the budget level. The finding. In a Taiwan contingency, the United States faces a contested access environment, a compressed timeline, and a magazine depth problem that its current force structure cannot fully resolve. 20 years of war games produced that finding. 20 years of budget cycles produced incremental responses. TRAM was funded at a demonstration level. DMO was developed as a concept. EABO was exercised at small scale. The financial architecture vulnerability was not addressed at all. 7 weeks of a real conflict against a $10 billion regional power produced what 20 years of war games could not. A political urgency that is moving budgets, accelerating programs, and creating interagency coordination that peace conditions never generated. This is the paradox that the Hormuz conflict leaves as its most lasting strategic legacy. Iran was not the threat the United States built its military to address. Iran was not China. Iran was not the peer competitor that American defense planning had been oriented toward for 2 decades. Iran was a regional power with a navy the U.S. destroyed in 2 weeks. And defeating Iran exposed more about American military readiness for the actual peer competition than any exercise, any simulation, or any classified assessment had managed to surface with sufficient urgency to produce action. The enemy that revealed the blind spots was not the intended adversary. The test case was not the intended exam. But the vulnerabilities are real, and now they are being addressed. Because Hormuz made the cost of not addressing them visible in a way that classified reports never could. $40 billion a week is a visible cost. 850 Tomahawks in 35 days is a visible cost. 250 tankers at anchor is a visible cost. A Lloyd's underwriter making the strategic decision is a visible cost. Visibility is what moves budgets. And Hormuz made 4 critical vulnerabilities visible in a way that will shape American naval investment for the next decade. China is watching that investment. China is calculating whether the investment closes the vulnerabilities before China's own window calculus changes. That race, American doctrinal closure speed versus Chinese window calculation, is the central strategic question of the next decade. Go back to where this series started. 3 B-2 bombers on a coral atoll in the Indian Ocean, 11 days before the shooting started, visible to anyone with a satellite subscription. Understood by almost no one. That image, the beginning of a 7-video series, was about preparation, about positioning assets before the fight begins, about making strategic decisions while the world is still asking the wrong questions. The U.S. Navy is in that position right now, not at Hormuz, at Taiwan. TRAM is being fielded. Distributed maritime operations is being implemented. EABO is being resourced. The financial architecture working group is running. The 96-hour window is being compressed. The mine warfare investment is being made. All of it is happening while the Taiwan fight has not started, while the window has not opened, while the decision has not been made. 7 videos ago, we explained how 3 B-2 bombers positioned on an island changed the strategic calculation of a war before it began. The aircraft were there. The targets were mapped. The decision was already made. The world just had not been told yet. The United States Navy is positioning itself right now for a fight it hopes never starts and is preparing for as if it definitely will. TRAM by 2027, Constellation frigates by 2028, EABO at scale by 2029, pre-committed financial architecture before any of those dates if the working group succeeds. The question every analyst, every defense planner, and every government watching this series of events is trying to answer is whether that preparation timeline is inside or outside China's window calculation. China knows the TRAM schedule. China knows the constellation delivery delays. China knows the EABO exercise calendar. China knows the working group has not produced a commitment. The Navy is rewriting the plan. China is reading the draft. And somewhere in a planning room in Beijing, an analyst is running the same math you have been watching us run for 7 videos. Magazine depth, mine clearance rates, insurance thresholds, 96-hour windows, and arriving at a number that represents how much time the United States has to close its gaps before the calculation changes. We do not know that number. Nobody outside that planning room does, but we know what Hormuz cost. We know what Taiwan would cost at 21 times the scale. And we know that the Navy that fought at Hormuz is not the same Navy that will fight at Taiwan, because 7 weeks in a 6-mile corridor taught it 4 things that 20 years of war games never did. Whether the lesson was learned fast enough, that is the only equation left in the series that we cannot decode from the outside. The plan is being rewritten. The clock is running. Subscribe to War Vision and drop READY in the comments. Not to tell us you are confident, to tell us you understand what READY actually requires now and what it costs to get there. Series 2 starts next week. The Taiwan Strait is 110 miles wide. The exam is not scheduled, and the mountain is still watching. We will be here when the equation resolves. Subscribe to War Vision, 7 videos, 1 conflict, 4 vulnerabilities found, 4 responses underway, and 1 exam still ahead at 110 miles wide, $6 trillion at stake, and a clearance timeline measured in years. The rewrite is not finished. Neither is the series.